John Ulzheimer is known as one of our nation's most recognized credit experts. Having worked for 28 years in the credit industry, John has become one of the most prolific speakers about credit and the go-to authority on answers to credit-related questions. Credit Countdown with John Ulzheimer.
Hello, this is John Ulzheimer. I am a consumer credit expert. I have almost 30 years of experience in the credit industry. I've spent time at FICO, which is the company behind the FICO credit scoring system, and Equifax, which is one of the three generally recognized credit reporting agencies here in these United States. Today I'm going to answer a really common question that I get from consumers, which is, why do I have so many credit scores? When you go out and apply for credit, it's very, very likely that the lender is going to pull at least one of your credit reports and at least one, if not more, of your credit scores. And the score that you may see from one particular credit bureau isn't necessarily the same 3-digit number that you're going to see from another credit bureau. And so it gives this perception, which is real, that you have more than one credit score. So I'm going to blow your mind. Not only do you have more than one credit score, you have hundreds of credit scores, and most of them you'll never see, you've never heard of, because they're custom developed scores that no lender is required to ever share with you. I remember one time I was doing a presentation, this was back when I worked for FICO, and I was doing a presentation at a mortgage banker or mortgage broker association meeting, and there was, who knows how many hundreds of people in the room. And when I was doing these presentations about credit scoring, I was usually the least popular guy in the room because no one liked hearing about how you were going to be forced to use this credit score because of Fannie and Freddie mandate. This was one of the rare occasions where I was not the least popular person in the room. I was actually the second least popular person. There was actually a guy from a large national bank that basically said, hey, we score people hundreds of times a year. And people were like blown away about that. And they didn't quite understand, how in the world does one person who has one account with one bank get scored hundreds of times a year? And he went on to discuss that there are so many points in the life cycle of a customer that they score that person for transaction fraud, credit risk, account management purposes, collections, anything you could possibly think of. There's usually a numeric value assigned to that, and they use that score to make decisions. So it kind of underscores just how many credit scores we all have. When we're talking about credit bureau scores, which are the ones that are front and center, those are the ones that are obviously the most commonly known, FICO scores, Vantage scores, we still have dozens and dozens of those. And there's a couple of reasons. Number one is because you have 3 credit reports. And because you have 3 credit reports, you're going to have different credit scores that are generated off of that data, because the data is usually somewhat different or different enough to yield a different credit score, even if you were to run them through the same exact model. They're not going to have the same number of inquiries. They're not going to have identical accounts. Even if they do have identical accounts, they may update at different times of the month, which means that the information is not going to be identical across all 3 of the credit bureaus. Number 2 is you have multiple different generations of credit scores. So think Vantage Score 1, Vantage Score 2, Vantage Score 3, Vantage Score 4. These are 4 generations of these scores. There are even more. There are actually dozens of versions of FICO's credit scores commercially available. Now, don't get me wrong. This is not a criticism of FICO or Vantage Score or any scoring platform. This is not a criticism of any of that. This is just the reality. It's like telephones, right? iPhone this, iPhone that, iOS this, iOS that, Windows this, Windows that. There's multiple generations of all this software floating around out there. There's multiple generations of the hardware floating around out there. People still use the older versions. They don't have to immediately swap to a newer version. So what ends up happening is you have versions that pile on top of each other. So at any given point in time, you have all these scoring systems that are still available and in use by lenders. Heck, Fannie and Freddie are required to use credit scores that were built, around the turn of the century. That's 20 some odd years ago. It's not any fault of any credit score developer. This is just the mandate coming from Fannie and Freddie. And since then, there have been multiple credit score generations that have been built, because every few years, the scoring companies rebuild their platforms. And so that's why you have all these different credit scores that just pile on top of each other. And so just because you may see that your score from one credit bureau, from one particular credit score at one point in time is 720, that absolutely doesn't mean that all of your scores are 720. If that were true, then you wouldn't have to have you wouldn't have multiple credit scores. You would just have a single credit score, which makes absolutely no sense for the reasons that I just articulated. So what do you do as a consumer? Well, it's actually very easy what you do as a consumer. Instead of trying to manage to dozens and dozens of credit scores, which is impossible, manage to your 3 credit reports, because most of your scores are generated off of that data. So as long as you have solid credit reports, no late payments, low credit card utilization, not a whole lot of debt, few accounts with balances, not a lot of inquiries, a well-aged credit report. I mean, this is the formula for having a good credit score, regardless of who built it, regardless of what bureau it's coming from. If you can do those things, lather, rinse, repeat, you're going to have killer credit scores regardless of the brand or variation or generation. And you're not going to have to worry about the fact that you have, dozens and dozens of credit scores floating around out there. So if you have any questions about credit scores, drop them in the comment section below and I'll do my best to get to them. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk again soon.
For more videos and credit tips from John Ulzheimer, go to www.tradelinesupply.com.